stubborn, but I'm also, when I've stepped in, I'm pretty good at taking responsibility for it and owning up to it. And now it's a quest to, what do I do with this? How?
For decades, Brad Pitt's love life has been one of Hollywood's most closely guarded mysteries. Behind the red carpets, the headlines, and the countless rumors, there was always one question fans couldn't stop asking. Who is the woman Brad Pitt truly loved the most? Not the tabloid's favorite romance. Not the high-profile marriages plastered across magazine covers. But the woman who left a mark on him so deep that even now, after years of silence, he finally admits the truth. And today, at last, Brad Pitt has broken that silence. In a rare, emotional moment during a private conversation that insiders claim shook him to his core. Brad finally confessed that there was one woman, one unforgettable presence who he quietly carried in his heart through every relationship, every success, and every heartbreak. A woman he says was the closest thing to a soulmate I ever had. A woman he lost too soon, or perhaps, as some insiders believe, a woman he never truly let go of. For years, Hollywood speculated. Was it an ex-wife? An early girlfriend? A hidden romance the public never knew about? Why did Brad wait until now, after decades of fame, chaos, and rebuilding his life, to share the truth? And why does this confession matter now, at this moment, more than ever? Because according to those closest to him, Brad Pitt isn't just revealing a secret. He's revealing a regret, a longing, and a truth that changes everything we thought we knew about his life. For most of his life, Brad Pitt has been a man millions admired but very few truly understood. From the moment he burst onto the Hollywood scene in the early 1990s, Brad became more than an actor. He became a symbol of success, charm, and effortless cool. But that image came with a price. The world felt entitled to every detail of his relationships. Every rumor, every whisper, and through all the noise, Brad stayed silent, smiling through interviews, dodging questions, and burying parts of himself so deep that even those close to him didn't always see the full picture. But something changed recently. Something that made Brad, now older, wiser, and far more reflective, finally open up about the one thing he had never been able to share. Happened during what was supposed to be a simple conversation, private, off camera, just Brad and a longtime friend he trusted more than anyone. They were discussing life, aging, and the strange experience of looking back at decades that now feel like they passed in the blink of an eye. Brad was unusually thoughtful that night. He'd been working on himself for years, therapy, sobriety, peacemaking. He was calmer, more grounded, but also more honest. It's strange, Brad said quietly, how you can live a whole life and still feel like parts of it were left unfinished. His friend asked gently, "What do you regret the most?" Brad didn't hesitate. Her, he said. At first, his friend thought Brad meant one of the women the world endlessly associates him with: Jennifer Aniston, Angelina Jolie, Gwyneth Paltrow. Names everyone knows. Relationships everyone watched unfold like chapters in an open book. But Brad shook his head. No, he said. Not who people think. For a long moment, Brad stared out the window as if searching for her ghost in the city lights. Then, for the first time, he spoke the truth he had carried for decades, that there was one woman who changed him, grounded him, challenged him, and understood him in a way no one else ever had. A woman he once believed he would build a future with. A woman who wasn't famous, whose life wasn't public, and whose name had never reached the tabloids. She was the love of my life, Brad finally admitted. And I didn't realize it until she was gone. His friend was stunned. This wasn't the Brad Pitt the world knew, the one who carefully measured his words, who avoided emotional vulnerability. This was a man confronting the most human truth there is: that time doesn't wait, and neither does love. Brad explained that he had met her long before the world claimed ownership of his name. Before the mega hits, before the paparazzi, before the pressure. He was young, hopeful, still finding his place in Hollywood. She was grounded, warm, and uninterested in fame. She saw Brad the person, not Brad the rising star. And that, he says, is what made her different. We were kids, Brad recalled. You think you have all the time in the world. You think love will always come back. Sometimes it doesn't. Life pulled them apart. Hollywood swept him in a new direction. He became busy, distracted, consumed by the whirlwind of celebrity. She continued her own life quietly, without the spotlight, without the chaos. Their connection faded not because they stopped caring, but because the world around Brad demanded everything from him. Only years later, after marriages, heartbreaks, family struggles, and rebuilding himself from the inside out, did Brad realize what he had lost. She knew me before any of this meant anything, he said, before I lost myself in all of it. His confession left his friend quiet, because this wasn't gossip or scandal or a celebrity headline. This was the truth of a man who had lived long enough to recognize which moments mattered and which ones he could never get back. Brad Pitt, after decades of mystery, had finally revealed his greatest heartbreak. He once walked away from the woman he now believes was his soulmate. After his quiet confession, Brad Pitt leaned back, almost surprised at himself. For decades he had built wall-strong ones around the parts of his heart he didn't want the world to touch. But now, the memories were flowing freely. And for the first time, he allowed himself to revisit the story of the woman he should never have let go. Her name, which he still refuses to reveal publicly, belonged to someone who lived far outside Hollywood's glare. She wasn't a model, a rising actress, or a celebrity in the making. She was simply real, grounded, sharp-witted, someone who spoke to Brad like he was just another person, not a star, not an icon, not a future, a dash lister. Brad first met her before Legends of the Fall, before Seven, before he became the Brad Pitt the world fell in love with. Back then, he was still struggling to pay rent, bouncing between auditions, sharing cheap apartments, and driving his beat-up Datsun around Los Angeles. It was a time when dreams were big, but money was small. And she was by his side during it all. She made everything feel less heavy, Brad remembered. I'd come home from a terrible audition, convinced I'd never make it. And she'd just look at me and say, "Okay, try again tomorrow." She believed in me before I believed in myself. They talked about everything. Movies, life, childhood memories. They'd take long drives with the windows down, blasting music from cassettes worn thin. Brad said that, with her, he felt a kind of peace he hadn't felt with anyone since. But as Brad's career suddenly accelerated, the pressure around him intensified. His role in Thelma and Louise made him instantly famous, practically overnight. And fame, he says, became a storm he didn't know how to navigate. It's like being thrown into the ocean without warning, he explained. One moment you're anonymous, the next moment the world thinks it owns you. Studios demanded more of him. Directors wanted meetings. Publicists created strict schedules. Everyone around him insisted he had to play the game if he wanted to stay on top. And caught in the middle of all that noise was her. She tried to be supportive, she really did, but fame changes the rhythm of everyday life. Suddenly, Brad wasn't just her boyfriend. He was a rising superstar. Their quiet dinners turned into rushed phone calls. Their weekend plans evaporated under press events, premieres, and endless obligations. She never asked for any of that, Brad admitted. I dragged her into a world she didn't want. The pressure wasn't the only problem. Brad was changing too faster than he realized. He was overwhelmed, distracted, stretched thin. He began slipping into the persona Hollywood crafted for him, and without meaning to, he drifted further away from the man she first fell in love with. One night, after weeks of barely seeing each other, she finally told him what he'd been too afraid to confront. "You're becoming someone I don't recognize," she whispered. Brad didn't argue. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew she was right. They ended things quietly, no fights, no shouting, just two people realizing they were standing at different points in their lives. She hugged him. He held her tight, not knowing it would be the last time. And then she walked away before he could stop her. For years afterward, Brad tried to move forward. He dated. He married. He became a father. He lived through some of the most public relationships in Hollywood history. But no matter how much time passed, there was always a part of him that remembered the simplicity, the calm, the sense of belonging he had with her. "I thought maybe life would circle back," Brad said softly. "I thought maybe one day we'd cross paths again." But life didn't circle back. Years later, Brad learned through a mutual friend that she had moved on. Married, built a quiet life somewhere far from Los Angeles. No spotlight, no chaos, just peace. And that was when it hit him, the one truth he had avoided for decades. He had loved her deeply, quietly, silently. And he had let her slip away. It was the mistake he would never outrun. As Brad Pitt's career exploded. The world saw only the glamorous surface, the blockbuster movies, the magazine covers, the awards, the red carpets. But behind the scenes, Brad was often wrestling with the weight of a private regret that refused to fade. While millions envied his life, he quietly carried the ache of something he couldn't replace. Something he lost long before he knew what it was worth. He buried himself in work. Set after set, movie after movie, he convinced himself. She wasn't just a chapter, Brad said. She was the foundation. And I didn't see that until much later. Brad's public relationships came with intense scrutiny. With Jennifer Aniston, the media followed every breath they took. They were the perfect Hollywood couple, smiling on red carpets, glowing in magazine spreads, adored by fans. But perfection in public doesn't guarantee peace in private. Brad admitted that even during those years, he often felt ungrounded, scattered, lost. "I kept thinking I needed to become the man people expected me to be," he said. "But I didn't know who I was." The pressure mounted. The tabloids created stories faster than he could deny them. Every argument became a headline. Every moment of silence became speculation. Slowly, he began to withdraw, not just from his partner, but from himself. His marriage ended, and Brad did what he always did. He worked. Then came Angelina Jolie, one of the most intense, high-profile romances Hollywood had ever seen. With her, the world saw passion, family, adventure. Together, they built a life filled with travel, humanitarian work, and 6 beautiful children. But even then, Brad said, he struggled internally. The more complicated his life became, the more he realized how much he had changed since those early years when he had nothing but hope and the woman who believed in him. During his darkest moments, the drinking, the self-neglect, the emotional distance, Brad often thought about her, not because he wanted to go back, but because she reminded him of who he used to be. "She represents the last time my life felt simple," he confessed. "The last time I felt whole without trying." His breakup with Angelina shattered him. The custody battles, the therapy sessions, the headlines tearing apart every detail of his private life, the world watched. Brad Pitt like he was a character in a sad movie. But inside, he was rebuilding himself piece by painful piece. Sobriety brought clarity, and clarity brought truth. Brad's therapist once asked him 2 questions that changed everything. Who grounded you the most in your life? Who did you feel safest with? Without thinking, Brad answered both questions with the same name. He realized then that the regret wasn't about losing a relationship. It was about losing the version of himself he had when he was with her, the person he had abandoned in pursuit of fame, success, and expectations. He kept asking himself the same haunting question: if I had slowed down, would she still be here? Brad never reached out to her, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew she deserved peace, not a return to the chaos he lived in. He respected her life too much to disturb it. I loved her, he said quietly. But loving someone sometimes means letting them stay where they're happy. And so Brad carried the regret not as bitterness, but as a reminder. A reminder of what mattered, what didn't, and what he would do differently if life ever gave him a second chance. But life wasn't done surprising him, because just when he believed that chapter was closed forever, something happened that Brad never expected. Brad Pitt never imagined life would give him another moment connected to the woman he once loved so deeply and lost so quietly. After decades of fame, heartbreak, rebuilding, and reflection, he accepted that some chapters are meant to stay closed. He believed her story with him had ended long ago, and he had learned to live with that finality. But life, as Brad discovered, has a strange way of returning things to us exactly when we think they're gone forever. That had happened on an ordinary afternoon. Years after Brad had embraced sobriety and found a calmer, more honest rhythm in his life. He had finished a meeting and decided to take a walk alone, something he rarely did in his earlier years. The streets were buzzing, people rushing around him. But Brad felt unusually grounded then as he turned a corner near a small cafe tucked between two busy storefronts. He heard a voice he hadn't heard in decades. Soft, warm, familiar. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just her. He froze. It was impossible, he thought. His mind had played tricks on him before. But when he turned, she was there sitting at a table outside, sipping tea, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in that gentle way he remembered so vividly. She looked older, of course. Life had painted new stories on her face. But she was still unmistakably her. Brad felt the world tilt for a moment. Not because he wanted to run to her or reclaim something long gone, but because seeing her again brought everything back: the warmth, the comfort, the clarity, the ache. He didn't approach her immediately. He stood still, hidden behind a few people, talking himself through what he should do. Was it selfish to interrupt her life? Would his presence disturb her peace? Would it reopen wounds she had already healed? Just as he decided to quietly walk away, she looked up, and their eyes met. Time stopped. There was no anger, no sadness, no regret in her expression. Only surprise. And something softer: recognition, perhaps. A quiet acknowledgement of a chapter neither of them had ever erased. She smiled. And in that instant, years of buried emotion cracked open inside Brad. He walked toward her slowly. When he finally reached her table, he didn't know what to say. For a man who had delivered some of the greatest lines in film history, Brad Pitt suddenly found himself speechless. She broke the silence first. "It's been a long time," she said gently. Brad nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, a lifetime." They talked not about fame or heartbreak or mistakes, but about life. Simple things. Where they lived. How they'd changed. What they'd learned. The conversation wasn't emotional or dramatic. It was peaceful, familiar, almost soothing. She told him about her family, her home, the quiet life she'd built far from the chaos of Hollywood. Brad listened, grateful she had found stability, knowing he could never have given that to her back then. When she asked about his life, Brad answered truthfully something he couldn't have done years earlier. He talked about sobriety, fatherhood, healing, therapy. He spoke of mistakes and lessons. And though he never confessed she was the love of his life, he did say something he had never said aloud before. "You were one of the best parts of my life." "I didn't realize it then." But I do now." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she placed her hand on his, just briefly, and said, "You were important to me too, and I'm glad you found yourself." There was no rekindling, no romantic spark meant to reignite the past. What happened was something far deeper: closure, understanding, a quiet, mutual honoring of what had once been. They parted with a hug, soft, warm, familiar. Not passionate, not painful. Just two people saying goodbye properly this time. As Brad walked away, he didn't feel the crushing regret that had followed him for decades. Instead, he felt peace, the kind that comes only when a long-buried truth finally finds light. Later that evening, when his friend asked why he seemed different, Brad just smiled and said, "Sometimes life gives you a chance to heal the things you didn't know were still open." Brad Pitt didn't get her back. He didn't need to. He got something far more powerful: the freedom to finally let her go.